The man brought the girl to the basement. The moment the lights turned on, she froze in place, seeing a boy lying on the floor with an iron chain around his neck. The terrified girl immediately turned to run away, but the man had specifically chosen her as a nanny for a reason. He knew her visa had expired, and she was facing deportation. He promised that if she stayed to work, he would ask a friend in the Home Office to help resolve her visa issues. Having no other choice, the girl agreed. The man handed her a prepared toolkit containing pepper spray and a stun baton, warning her that the boy downstairs could become aggressive and that she should use the tools if necessary. He also instructed her never to believe a word the boy said. So who is this boy locked in the basement? His name is Tommy, a former street thug who spent his days drinking, doing drugs, and loitering. One day, after getting blackout drunk and parting ways with his girlfriend, he was wandering the streets half awake when a car suddenly pulled up behind him. Before he could react, he was knocked unconscious, only to wake up later in the basement. Upon seeing the girl's unfamiliar face, Tommy immediately begged her to help him escape. The girl, whose name was Rina, kept Chris's warning in mind and chose to ignore him. After her first day of work, Chris explained Tommy's situation again, assuring her that he wouldn't be locked in the basement forever. He praised Rina's performance and urged her to keep their secret. At dinner time, Chris brought Tommy food with a friendly demeanor, completely unlike a typical kidnapper. However, Tommy remained ungrateful, flipping his plate and relentlessly cursing at Chris while swearing to kill his entire family once he escaped. He then suddenly lunged forward, attempting to strangle Chris, but Chris swiftly neutralized him with a stun baton. When Tommy woke up, Chris had set up a television to play a montage of Tommy's highlights, featuring short videos he had posted on social media showcasing street fights, drunk driving, and vandalism. Chris intended for Tommy to reflect on his actions, but Tommy felt pride instead of shame, even bragging that his fighting skills could make him a movie star. Chris coldly replied that this was the real world, not a movie, and that his actions had hurt people. The video then cut to a public service announcement Chris had filmed with his son, detailing the annual number of car accident fatalities in the UK to illustrate the severe consequences of Tommy's reckless behavior. From then on, Chris continuously played these videos and motivational speeches, attempting to brainwash Tommy into becoming a good person. Tommy refused to listen, struggling desperately against his chains and accidentally kicking over his chamber pot in the process. Despite this, Chris believed his rehabilitation efforts were succeeding and brought Catherine down that night to show off the results. To their surprise, Tommy threw his soiled pants directly into Catherine's face and, catching Chris off guard, attempted to strangle him with the chain. Unfazed, Chris calmly sent Catherine upstairs, before easily subduing Tommy. He then went to his wife's room to apologize, desperate to prove he could reform the boy, though Catherine remained utterly disheartened. Once she went to the bathroom, Chris retrieved a toolbox from the closet. On his way downstairs, his son suddenly called out to him, briefly mentioning a name, Charlie. "We will keep Charlie's identity a secret for now." Back in the basement, Tommy continued to hurl insults, completely oblivious to Chris's boiling rage. Chris opened the toolbox, revealing an array of torture devices and weapons. He sprayed Tommy with pepper spray and brutally beat him with a baton, treating him like a wild dog being tamed. By the end of the beating, Chris himself was in tears, acting like a disappointed parent mourning a child's failures. That evening, Jonathan told Chris he had finished his homework and wanted to play with Tommy, but Chris felt it was premature given the day's violent incident. A week quickly passed. When Rina returned to the estate, Tommy remained just as aggressive, mocking her foreign accent, telling her to go back to her country, and verbally abusing her until she cried. Just then, Chris entered the basement, prompting Tommy to immediately dial back his hostility. Noticing Rina wiping away tears, Chris deduced what had happened and forced Tommy to apologize. Satisfied with Tommy's seemingly improved compliance, Chris rewarded him with painkillers and a special extracurricular activity, allowing him to watch a movie with the family. Chris anchored the chain to the living room ceiling, granting Tommy limited mobility. Although Chris initially chose a war movie, his son Jonathan suggested a different film, bringing up Charlie's name once more. Hearing the name brought a pleased look to Chris's face, and he agreed to play the movie Kes. Drawn by the sound of the film, Catherine came downstairs and joined Jonathan on the sofa. The four of them watched the movie together in a seemingly heartwarming scene, though the heavy chain around Tommy's neck cast an eerie shadow over the domestic warmth. The film's tragic plot quickly overwhelmed Tommy, who voluntarily asked to be sent back to the basement. Later that night, Catherine asked her husband why he had played that particular movie, as it made her desperately miss Charlie. Charlie was the couple's other child, who had passed away under undisclosed circumstances. Chris had kidnapped Tommy with the explicit goal of molding him into a replacement for Charlie, hoping to heal his wife's grief. Meanwhile, down in the basement, Tommy tried to turn off the endless anti-drug propaganda videos, but the chain restricted his reach. After struggling in vain, he surrendered to helplessness, and the usually hardened thug broke down in tears. The following day, Tommy offered a solemn apology to the couple, promising to behave. He hoped this would convince Chris to turn off the monitors, but the moment Catherine left the room, Chris switched the TV back on, leaving Tommy consumed by profound despair. Despite this, their relationship did begin to shift. Catherine noticed Tommy frequently squinting and thoughtfully provided him with prescription glasses. Initially, Tommy denied needing them, but gasped in amazement the moment he put them on. When Chris played the footage of Tommy's street fights again, Tommy still watched with amusement but quickly wiped the smile off his face upon realizing it would anger his captor. Attempting a new tactic, Tommy lied, claiming he was facing criminal charges and that his disappearance would alert his parole officer. Chris immediately saw through the deception, having already conducted a thorough background check. He knew Tommy had never been arrested or acquired a criminal record, despite his extensive misdeeds, which was exactly why Chris had selected him for this twisted rehabilitation project. Acknowledging Tommy's recent good behavior, Chris lengthened his chain to expand his range of movement. Catherine brought him some books, which Tommy silently accepted under Chris's stern gaze, despite having zero interest in reading. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Chris immediately pressed his stun baton against the chain, silently threatening Tommy to stay quiet, while Catherine answered the door. It was just a delivery driver. Tommy recognized this as a prime escape opportunity, but knowing that a failed attempt would obliterate whatever fragile trust he had built, he chose to stay silent. On another occasion, Catherine found a pack of cigarettes in Jonathan's pocket, triggering an extreme reaction. Even though her son confessed to trying just one out of curiosity, she brutally punished him by forcing him to smoke the entire pack. The family seemingly worshipped this deeply twisted educational philosophy, relying on pain to forge psychological conditioning. Whether forcing their son to chain smoke or making Tommy watch violent footage on a loop, their core method was replacing pleasure with trauma. They ensured that repeating an undesirable action would trigger horrifying memories, fostering an intense aversion, an approach fundamentally identical to obedience training for dogs. Another week passed, and Rena arrived for her routine cleaning. Tommy asked her for a cigarette, and though he immediately recognized she was lying when she claimed not to smoke, he let it go and apologized for his past rudeness. When Rena left, she accidentally left her stun baton behind, giving Tommy a fleeting hope of fighting back, but his chain was just an inch too short to reach it. When Chris came down with dinner, Tommy quickly sat on his bed and pretended to read. Pleased with Tommy's recent behavior, Chris offered a new reward, a non-alcoholic beverage for every book he finished. On Tommy's birthday, the family even baked a cake and celebrated with him in the basement. Chris then announced an even bigger surprise, immediately pulling out a syringe of anesthetic. When Tommy woke up, he found himself lying in a grassy field. The family had taken him out for a picnic, though the heavy chain remained securely fastened around his neck. Tommy began making genuine attempts to integrate into the family, sharing amusing stories from his past and playing cricket with Jonathan, which significantly deepened the boy's trust in him. After his next sedated transition, Tommy awoke to find himself in an upstairs bedroom. Chris had installed ceiling tracks, granting Tommy access between his room and the bathroom. With Chris's permission, he could even navigate the rest of the house, though key areas were secured with combination locks, and a bell had been attached to his collar to monitor his movements. Catherine's mood vastly improved during this period, bringing Chris immense relief, though an offhand joke from Tommy inadvertently hit a nerve with Chris. Meanwhile, Rena appeared distracted during her cleaning duties and hesitated to leave once finished. Upon Catherine's gentle prodding, Rena confessed she was being stalked by strangers, likely old enemies tracking her down. Hearing this, Catherine generously offered to let Rena temporarily move into the estate, giving her the basement room that Tommy had previously occupied. Having a young woman living in the house stirred Tommy's impulses, and one night, the frantic ringing of his collar bell as he relieved his frustrations led Chris to mistakenly believe he was trying to escape. Yet, Tommy's youthful vigor sparked a sense of envy in Chris, who desperately wished to reignite his own romantic relationship with Catherine. Achieving this required some assistance from Tommy and Rena. The following day, Tommy lured Catherine into his room under the guise of discussing a book, allowing Chris and Rena to secretly prepare a romantic candlelight dinner. When Catherine stepped out into the yard and saw the meticulously arranged flowers, a long, absent smile finally graced her face. As music played and the couple danced gracefully, Tommy watched quietly from the sidelines, unexpectedly feeling a fleeting sense of genuine happiness. However, his reason screamed at him that he had to escape. He begged Rena to sneak him a fork from the kitchen to pick the lock on his collar. Reluctant to cross Chris, Rena compromised by simply leaving the tool drawer open. Stretching to his absolute limit, Tommy managed to snag a screwdriver and quickly concealed it inside a nearby flower pot. That evening, Chris made a point to thank Tommy, who seized the moment to question why he had been chosen, suspecting he wasn't the first prisoner held in the house. Chris completely denied the accusation, believing their current domestic routine could last indefinitely. However, his illusion shattered when a group of ruthless thugs stormed the estate while he was out running errands, demanding to take Rena. Rena finally confessed her dark past. She was a former gang member who had defected, and being dragged back meant almost certain death. Right before she was taken away, she hurriedly whispered the ceiling track's passcode to Tommy. By the time Chris returned, Rena was gone. He assured Tommy not to worry, promising to upgrade the estate's security system the very next day to ensure no one could ever break in again. Realizing this would make his own escape virtually impossible, Tommy resolved to break out that very night. He muffled his collar's bell with chewing gum, stacked his books to reach the ceiling track, and unlocked the mechanism. Retrieving the hidden screwdriver from the flower pot, he successfully pried open the heavy chain. Hearing a noise, Chris grabbed his gun to investigate, but Tommy, lying in wait, ambushed him from the shadows and snatched the weapon. Astonishingly, Chris showed no anger. Catherine rushed downstairs and gently approached Tommy, attempting to de-escalate the situation. In a surreal moment of vulnerability, Tommy handed the gun over to her, expressing profound betrayal and sorrow rather than violent rage. Catherine desperately pleaded with him to stay, promising he would never have to sleep in chains again, but Tommy only wanted to go home. When Catherine tried to manipulate his emotions by bringing up Jonathan, Tommy fired back with a harsh truth that sliced through Catherine's delusions. Devastated, she ordered Tommy back to his room, but Tommy had completely seen through their twisted charade. Chris stepped forward, opened the front door, and gently told his wife that they had pushed things too far. The tragic reality was that the couple had previously employed these exact extreme methods to reform their biological son, Charlie, which ultimately drove the boy to end his own life to escape the unbearable torment. The devastating memory overwhelmed Catherine. She attempted to turn the gun on herself, only to discover it was completely unloaded. Finally accepting defeat, the couple let Tommy walk free. Sprinting into the night, Tommy ran until he collapsed on a highway, where he was eventually found and taken to a hospital. At the hospital, Tommy initially recounted every terrifying detail of his abduction, but soon retracted his statement, claiming he had been hallucinating and had simply been traveling with friends. The bitter irony was that during his 90-day disappearance, his mother never once reported him missing, sending only a few token text messages. Tommy was struck by the sickening realization that his psychotic captors had paid more attention to him than his own family ever did. Later that night, Tommy tracked down his girlfriend at a nightclub. Watching her associate with other men and wallow in her chaotic lifestyle planted a terrifyingly dark seed in his mind. The very next day, he lured her out, sedated her with a drug, and drove her straight back to Chris's estate. The film, directed by Janko Marsa and released in 2025, serves as a grim psychological experiment regarding the rehabilitation of troubled youth. It brings to life the extreme disciplinary fantasies harbored by many frustrated parents. When confronted with rebellious teenagers who skip school, instigate fights, and defy authority, many believe that sparing the rod spoils the child, demanding draconian intervention without ever questioning the root causes of the child's behavior. Chris is not presented as a mindless thug, but rather as an educator who completely lost his grip on reality. He forced Tommy to watch footage of his violent behavior not to humiliate him, but to force him to face the consequences of his actions. He provided books, prescription glasses, birthday cakes, and family picnics, shedding genuine tears while administering brutal beatings. Chris fundamentally believed that pain could correct one's path, that strict rules enforced by severe punishment could rebuild a person, and that persistent conditioning would inevitably turn Tommy into an upstanding citizen. This logic is distressingly familiar. The only difference is that the film externalizes it with a literal iron chain, whereas reality utilizes invisible ones. Chris's methodology mirrors the exact disciplinary structures society often normalizes, magnified to an extreme to expose its true, horrifying nature. The endless cycle of control, punishment, observation, and reward is standard obedience training for an animal, not an educational framework for a human being. So what should true education look like? The film answers this through the scene where the family watches Ken Loach's Kes, a story about a neglected, working-class boy who forms a bond with a kestrel. Dismissed as a worthless loser by his family and school, the boy discovers his own self-worth through taming the bird. The emotional weight of the film forces Tommy to retreat to the basement because, for the first time in his life, he saw his own reflection in a story. He felt understood rather than violently corrected. True education does not seek to forcefully alter someone from the outside, but to awaken their inner self through genuine guidance, recognition, and empathy. Tommy was never inherently evil. During the 90 days he was missing, his mother never contacted the police, his friends carried on with their lives, and nobody asked a single question. The world barely registered his absence, treating him as though he never existed. Ignored by his family, discarded by society, and invisible to his peers, the core issue with troubled youths is rarely innate malice. Instead, it stems from a profound lack of being genuinely seen during the most formative years of their lives. In the film's final moments, Tommy successfully escapes, only to return to the estate with his sedated girlfriend in tow. While some viewers might misinterpret this as proof that the extreme rehabilitation worked, it is actually the film's most terrifying revelation, illustrating the dark transmission of violent discipline. A child broken and trained through such brutality does not grow into a liberated adult. They simply evolve into the next Chris. They will inevitably apply the exact same twisted logic to anyone they believe needs saving, simply because it is the only form of love they have ever known. This devastating cycle is not Tommy's fault, as it is the only lesson he was ever taught. The iron chain never truly disappeared, it merely found a new neck. This tragic perpetuation of abuse is the ultimate, inevitable outcome of obedience training education. That concludes today's review. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to follow, like, and comment, and I will see you in the next installment.